And then once, if you just do the arrows for back and forth.
Perfect.
You can advance with
That's
those
great.
slides. Yeah.
And I looked through the whole agenda, so I see everything in there. Yeah, it's always fun to get, kind of hear what's going on.
One minute. Departure on gate 5. Oh. I call the December 6, 2022 City Council regular meeting to order. City Clerk Ben Lane, will you please conduct the roll call?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor David Ortega,
Present.
Vice Mayor Tom Durham,
Here.
Council Members Tammy Caputi,
Here.
Betty Janik,
Here.
Kathy Littlefield,
Here.
Linda Milhaven,
Here.
and Solange Whitehead. Councilwoman Whitehead, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you.
My speakers were off.
City Manager Jim Thompson,
Here.
City Attorney Sherry Scott,
Here.
City Treasurer Sonia Andrews,
Here.
City Auditor Sharon Walker,
Here.
and the clerk is present. Thank you, Mayor.
Excellent. We have Scottsdale Police Officer Dustin Patrick and Sergeant Sean Ryan, as well as firefighter Josh Porter here in the building. Should anyone need assistance, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilwoman Betty Janik. Thank you. We continue to think and forefront in our minds the country of Ukraine and the people of Ukraine as they fight for their freedom and democracy. So let's take a moment of silence. Thank you. So, Holiday Lights is back and in full swing at the McCormick-Stillman Railroad Park. No trip to the park is complete without a spin in the historic Charros Carousel or a cup of hot cocoa from Hartley's General Store. Don't miss this Scottsdale holiday tradition. Next, I will call on our city manager, Jim Thompson, to provide the city manager's report.
Mr. Mayor, I believe we have a presentation this evening.
Hi, I'm Public Affairs Specialist Stephanie Hirata with 5 fast things happening around the city you need to know. Starting us off at number 5, Scottsdale Gateway markers are getting a new look. Residents and visitors entering Scottsdale will soon be welcomed to the city by new artist-designed gateway markers selected by the community. The design includes a combination of natural materials with striking contemporary forms, which represents the integration of the old with the new and the harmony of nature with the built environment. The new markers will initially be built in 11 locations and replace existing entry markers. Installation of the new entry markers will begin in mid-December and be completed by the end of January. Coming in at number 4, Scottsdale Fire will participate in a $4 million grant to address occupational-related cancer. Firefighters have a 9% higher risk of being diagnosed with cancer and a 14% higher risk of dying from cancer than the general U.S. population. The University of Arizona will lead the study in partnership with the Arizona Fire Chiefs Association and Arizona State University. The research will test the effectiveness of whether blood or plasma donations lower levels of cancer-causing forever chemicals. Firefighters encounter these substances in many ways, including burning household items, potential contamination from personal protective equipment, and firefighter foam, which is used to put out burning liquids. Learn more at scottsdaleaz.gov and search cancer study. Next up at number 3, phone scammers are using caller ID software to mimic calls coming from Scottsdale Police. Scammers tell people they have a warrant and demand payment over the phone with credit cards, gift cards, or money orders. Police employees will never ask for payment over the phone to clear a warrant. Hang up if you receive one of these calls, then report it to the police non-emergency number at 480-312-5000. At number 2, the Maricopa County Flood Control District is starting construction on the Rawhide Wash Flood Hazard Mitigation Project in Scottsdale. The project entails a levee system to contain the 100-year flood along Rawhide Wash from Pinnacle Peak Road to a half-mile north of Happy Valley Road. The project will reduce flood risk and potential damage and remove more than 850 homes and buildings from the floodplain. Work on the first phase will extend from Pinnacle Peak Road to the Miller Road alignment. The project also includes new flood walls, existing walls improvements, and landscaping. Wrapping things up at number 1, Scottsdale recognized city staff at the annual 2022 Employee Awards on November 30th. Creating a program for local high school students to learn about court interpreting, improving safety for our solid waste workers, tackling lifeguard recruitment challenges with innovative incentives, those are just some of the ways employees made Scottsdale even better this year. The winners were among 185 nominated in several categories. You can read a summary of those honored and their contributions at scottsdaleaz.gov and search 2022 Employee Awards. And that's Scottsdale's Fast 5 for December. Thanks for watching.
Well, thank you. I'll introduce.
Mr. Mayor?
There you go.
Yeah,
our
I have
manager.
one more presentation
Good.
from Karen Churchard. Thank you.
Yes.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to give you an overview of the city's holiday events and the upcoming Scottsdale super season as part of the city manager's update. Scottsdazzle kicked off on November 26th with the 7th annual sing-along and tree lighting, which several of you participated in. Thank you for that. We have more than 50 events this year that's been curated by the tourism and events staff, and that's the largest lineup of events that to date that will continue through the holiday season. During the month of December, we will host several free events and activities such as Meet Santa at the Farmers Market that includes a free printed photo. Many of the events and activities are in partnership with the Old Town businesses, such as the Prancer's Puzzle Rides, which is an outdoor take on an escape room style scavenger hunt that takes place on golf carts by our local business Puzzle Rides. Additionally, we're thrilled that 10 Old Town restaurants and bars collaborated with our department to create 20 experiences ranging from dinners to tastings to food demonstrations for the holidays. There's 12 crafting, marry, make, and take opportunities by 5 Old Town merchants that are being offered, from painting an ornament to knitting your own chunky blanket and much more. Next, we have throughout Old Town lighting and decor that's abundant in many of the districts. And the Scottsdale waterfront, Arizona Canal area is a don't miss opportunity to really see the holiday decor at its finest. And on Saturday evenings, we have the free Scottsdazzle stroll that provides live entertainment and food offerings by local merchants. Additionally, McCormick-Stillman Railroad Park, which the mayor mentioned, is doing its nightly entertainment through December 30th. So staff began planning for the upcoming Super Bowl about 18 months ago, and we appreciate the funding requests that City Manager Thompson brought forward to all of you as part of the fiscal budget. And thank you for approving about 50+ projects that range from ADA ramps to updated crosswalks to landscaping to painting and improvements in the entertainment district. We're actually adding more projects recently, the Old Town Alley cleanup and recycling pilot, which is spearheaded by Councilwoman Janik. For the past 8 months, 21 departments and 3 partners have been meeting to get prepared for not only the Super Bowl, but for all the events that are taking place through what we're calling Scottsdale Super Season, which is a promotion that we are doing in partnership with Experience Scottsdale, our destination marketing organization. So beginning on December 12th, Experience Scottsdale will launch a Super Season paid media campaign targeted to visitors and residents, which will run through Super Bowl week. First in our Super Season lineup is the Barrett-Jackson Collector Car Auction, to be held January 22nd through the 30th at Westworld, where for more than 50 years, enthusiasts from all over the world have flocked to see these unique, sought-after, valuable automobiles as they cross the auction block. Next, our beloved historic Western events. The city began promoting 5 years ago as Western Week. Little do we know until Joan Fadala told me that as much as 50 years ago, it was called Western Week. So we're thrilled that we brought that back as a tradition, and that this event takes place annually the first weekend of February, features the 65th annual Hash Knife Pony Express, the 68th annual Parada del Sol Parade, the Art Walk Gold Palette, 2 days of free admission at Scottsdale's Museum of the West, and a newer but very popular event, the 7th annual Arizona Indian Festival, that will welcome back here at our redesigned Scottsdale Civic Center. The same weekend, on Saturday evening, the Thunderbirds will present their second annual concert in the Coliseum at the TPC's Scottsdale's famous 16th hole, featuring Maroon 5 and the Walker Hayes, which then leads us to the Waste Management Phoenix Open, the most fan-friendly venue on the PGA Tour that attracts the largest galleries of any golf tournament in the world. And 2023 marks the 36th consecutive year the tournament will have been played at TPC Scottsdale. The same week as the Open, excuse me, Greater Phoenix will welcome Super Bowl 57 that's being organized by the Arizona Super Bowl Host Committee in partnership with the NFL and many local and national stakeholders such as the City of Scottsdale. Scottsdale will host the AFC team at one of our resort properties, as well as the NFL Wives Association Charity Fashion Show at Scottsdale Fashion Square, along with what I'm sure will be many corporate private events. Additionally, Scottsdale will once again host ESPN, who will broadcast live several of its popular shows beginning on February 8th through February 12th, which is game day. The city is creating, in partnership with ESPN and Arizona Super Bowl Host Committee, the historic Old Town ESPN Main Street Tailgate, which will be a free event that will feature our merchants and restaurants within historic Old Town. Then we get a little breather for about 3 days, and then we kick off the 68th annual Scottsdale Arabian Horse Show, which is the world's largest show featuring more than 2,200 horses representing 1,300 owners. Last but certainly not least of our Super Scottsdale season is the city will welcome back the San Francisco Giants and its fans at Scottsdale Stadium as part of the 76th Cactus League beginning February 26th through March 25th. As Super Bowl 57 approaches, we will be seeing beautiful sunset and red rock images from throughout Arizona as part of the NFL's promotion, which includes this image taken in Scottsdale's McDowell Sonoran Preserve. The city of Scottsdale is proud to host holiday events and so many historic and mega events each year, and we look forward to promoting Scottsdale Super Season this January through March 2023. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Church.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, and Jim Thompson remotely. Thank you so much. We are on the threshold of an epic events season, the best season of all time. So, continuing, for your information, during tonight's meeting, the council may make a motion to recess into executive session to obtain legal advice on any applicable item on the agenda. If authorized by the council, the executive session will be held immediately and will not be open to the public. The public meeting will resume following the executive session if requested. Next, we will open public comment. Public comment is an opportunity for Scottsdale citizens, business owners, property owners to comment on any non-agendized item that are within the council's jurisdiction. Advocacy for a candidate or a ballot measure during the council meeting is not allowed pursuant to state law, but it must be within our jurisdiction. And as a new public comment, the council cannot take any action on those items. The speakers would be limited to 3 minutes. Clerk tells me there is no public comment, so therefore I will now close public comment. Next, we also added an item to the agenda. Item 16A was added to the agenda on November 30th, 2022, and requires a separate motion to remain on the agenda as presented or to be continued if the council wishes to. Now I entertain a motion to add item 16A.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to make a motion to add item number 16A. It was added to the agenda on November 30th, 2022, and requires a separate vote. So,
Second?
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, please record your vote.
Councilman Whitehead, yes.
Thank you. Next, we will proceed with the consent agenda, including item 16A. Items 1 through 16A is an opportunity, as all the information is posted and presented. It's an opportunity for any public comment on any of those items as listed, and therefore I would open comment for consent agenda items. I see there is one person wishing to speak regarding item number 10 on the consent agenda. That is Frederick Detman. If you could please come forward and address item number 10. We tell us your address, and you have 3 minutes. Thank you, sir.
My name is Frederick Detman. I'm about a 30-year resident of Scottsdale. I'm here representing an organization that you probably have never heard of, except for Mr. Thompson. It is called the Arcadia Vista Improvement Company. Our roots go back to 1917. We were incorporated in the state in 1954 as a not-for-profit. And we provide flood irrigation to periods, an area of downtown Scottsdale, basically, and PV. We are all volunteer, and we have one problem, and that is the abandonment of the alleys. I have a letter from one of the city services which kind of piques my problem. In this particular case, the city is abandoning the right-of-way to the alley and nothing else. In the second paragraph, it says, the city's decision to remove one particular function from the alley, the weekly collection of refuse, and blah, 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 so forth. We have the same type of situation come up repeatedly. This alley that in reference is an L-shaped with a north and south fragment and an east and west fragment. The east and west fragment is blocked by a concrete block wall, and the north and south segment is accessed by our irrigator on a regular basis, a cyclical basis. And most recently, about 2 weeks ago, he was walking in that alley, and the vegetation was so thick that he didn't see a ladder that was lying in the weeds, and he fell and injured himself. I mean, that's just the worst thing that happened to us. But basically, the maintenance of the alleys after this abandonment is something that I think I'd like to encourage the city to stress. Since I have a few seconds, I'll tell you, if you lived in Chicago and you had a 6-inch snowfall, the first thing you do is grab your shovel and go shovel the walkway out to the street. Then you take care of your driveway. Next thing you do is do that strip of concrete along the street. It's not your property, but if you don't do it, you're going to get a ticket or you're going to get an advice from the city of Chicago. If you manage poorly and somebody falls, you're going to get sued by that person, even if it's not your property. The attitude of the citizens in Scottsdale should be maintenance of the properties that are city property that are nearby there or in a juxtaposition of their particular properties. Thank you.
Okay, we also have an opportunity for any council members, if they had any question on any consent agenda items, 1 through 16A. I do not see any requests to speak, and also I will call on Councilwoman Whitehead just in case, because she is remote. I don't see any request. Okay, so accordingly, at this point, we would close public comment on consent agenda items. And may I have a motion to approve consent agenda items as agendized?
Second.
So moved.
Good. We have a motion by Vice Mayor Durham and a second. Seeing no discussion, please record your vote.
Councilwoman Whitehead, yes.
Thank you. That is unanimous. I do want to mention item 12 and 13 had to do with audits performed by the subcommittee, including Councilwoman Littlefield, Councilwoman Whitehead, and Vice Mayor. So thank you for your work, and that was the action that we took based on your recommendations. Next, we will move on to regular agenda items 17 and 18. Now, we ask that you participate. If you are coming forward or if someone is speaking, I'll try to be about as clear as possible that we allow 3 minutes. However, as council members and for those attending, all meetings shall observe the same rules of order and decorum applicable to us and to city staff. So we do not unauthorized remarks or demonstrations from the audience, such as applause, stamping feet, whistles, boos, yells, and/or demonstrations shall not be permitted. The meeting moves a lot faster, and I'm asked to make this admonishment. Violation of these rules could result in removal from the meeting by security staff. So everyone, we do have a list of several speakers for item 18. However, we will now go to regular agenda item number 17. Our presenter is Sharon Walker, a distinguished city auditor, and Brittany Williams, a Heinfeld with a auditing firm.
Mayor, members of council, thank you. Brittany and I are going to do a little bit of a tag team tonight. First, I want to do a brief introduction on the financial audit for members of the public. Then I'll turn it over to Brittany. She'll summarize the audit results. Brittany's a partner with Heinfeld Meach, the CPA firm that does our audit. And then it'll come back to me so that I can address a state compliance requirement, and then I'll present the requested action. Next, Kelly. So in terms of background, the charter actually makes the city council responsible for designating the CPA to perform the annual financial audit. And the council's assigned the contract administration responsibilities to my office. It's the city treasurer's staff the accounting and the finance staff who actually compile the hundreds of pages of financial statements, note disclosures that the Heinfeld Meach team audits. And then when that process is finished, we present the results to the council's audit committee. They received the reports on November 14th and recommended that they come to the city council for acceptance. And so now I'll turn it over to Brittany so she can tell you what the financial audit results were for this year.
Great, thank you, Sharon. Mayor Ortega, members of the City Council, thank you so much for having me here tonight. I'm always glad to come and present the results of the audit. We did have, as Sharon mentioned, we had a successful meeting with the audit committee last month. It went very well. I think we were able to answer any questions, but I will definitely be here for more questions this evening. So let's go ahead and get started. I saw on the agenda item that it was about 700 pages that you got to read through before we got here tonight, so hopefully you're well versed in all of that. Just kidding. But we did issue a number of reports, the first of which is the annual comprehensive financial report auditor's opinion on the full financial statement that the finance department prepares. And we gave an unmodified opinion on those financial statements, saying everything was materially correct. It was a very well done ACFR. It always is. They worked very hard, and it's a very high quality report. We also issued our auditor's opinion on the 7 component units of the City of Scottsdale, 5 CFDs, the Municipal Property Corporation, and the Scottsdale Preserve Authority. All 7 of those component units received an unmodified opinion as well, which is a clean opinion, no issues. We also issue a communication to governance that goes to the audit committee as well as you have it in your packet here tonight. It addresses any sort of significant accounting practices, any estimates that management is allowed to make in those financial statements. If we were to have any difficulties during the audit or disagreements with management, those types of issues would have been disclosed in this letter. There were no such issues. It was very clean and a standard report as usual. We also perform a single audit, which is an audit of the federal expenditures of the city. The city had significant federal expenditures this year, as you can imagine, from all of the COVID-19 federal dollars that have been released. We audited many of those programs as our major programs for the year. We alternate which federal programs we audit each year. In our single audit report, we issue a report on internal control and compliance. We did note one significant deficiency there, which we went over with the audit committee, but we can also discuss here if you'd like. It basically had to do with P-card transactions and having timely review of those. But I believe that management has issued a response, implemented a procedure, and corrected the situation. We also issue a report on compliance, internal control, and expenditures of those federal awards. There were no issues with that. You can see a full schedule of expenditures of federal awards in that report if you want to see every single federal dollar that was spent during the year. The total was $42.5 million for the fiscal year 22. We also issued an unmodified opinion for the federal compliance audit. And then there's always a schedule of prior audit findings. If there had been something in the prior year, we report on that. We're required to report on that. And we did report that the prior year audit deficiency had been fully corrected this year. We also issue another state funding compliance report on the highway user revenue fund monies. And we did see that the city was compliant with the state requirements for that report. We have a few reports left to issue. We're not quite done. There is a HUD report that gets filed with the federal government, and that's due on March 31st, as well as the annual expenditure limitation report, which is due to the state at the same time. Those are usually issued around February. So those are still to come. And I think I'll hand it back over to Sharon before we open it up for questions.
So, like I mentioned last year, there is one additional state compliance requirement, and it's actually at the very end of this citation because Brittany just presented the audit results, so that's the first part of it. And the second part is the governing body is to demonstrate compliance with Section 41-1494. That relates to HR type training, and the acting HR director has provided his assessment that the city's training and orientation materials comply with that statutory requirement. And then the next slide, Brittany.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the action that we're asking for tonight is to accept the financial audit reports and accept the staff report of compliance. But as Brittany mentioned, we're happy to take any questions that the council may have.
Thank you very much. As you know, Scottsdale maintains a very high 3-star bond rating, and this audit is a part of our performance as a distinguished city in the United States. I see Councilwoman Littlefield would like to speak.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I would like to move that we accept the financial year 2021-22 annual financial report as presented.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second.
Excuse me, Mayor.
The
slide's gone now, but if I could ask for also accepting the staff compliance report.
Add that in, please, also, yes. And accept the staff report for the city's compliance with ARS number 41-1494.
Second.
Thank you. We have a full clarified motion, including the items recommended by the city's audit committee. Accordingly, please record your vote.
Councilwoman Whitehead is a yes.
Thank you. That is unanimous. Outstanding. Next, we will move on to regular agenda item 18. And just to also mention, on item 17, there was no public comment or request for public comment on item 17. Next, we will move on to item number 18, which is the adoption of residential energy, and green construction code updates. Our presenter is Michael Clack, Chief Development Officer.
Good evening. Excuse me. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. We're here before you this evening to discuss the adoption of the 2021 Residential Energy, Green, and Construction Code updates. Next slide, please. As you all know,
You might stand closer to the mic.
oh, sorry about that. As you all may recall, the last time we were before you, we gave you a little bit of background about these building codes that are developed by the International Code Council, of which Scottsdale is a member of, and is supported by various organizations that you see there up on the slide. Next slide will show you why this matters to the city of Scottsdale. They provide clarity in the code provisions while enhancing life safety. They improve community value and quality of life. There are also provisions in there that protect natural resources, and it also accounts for new technologies as these codes are being developed. I think it's important to point out also that the 2021 codes are consistent with the city's adopted general plan because it references each of these elements that you see there on the slide. 2021 residential energy and green construction codes were presented to the City Council back in August 23rd of 2022 as a work study session, and what the Council gave direction to staff to do was to advance the building and fire code amendments in September, conduct additional public outreach, and advance the International Green Construction Code for council consideration as a mandatory code before the end of the year. On September 20th, 2022, the City Council adopted 8 different building code and fire codes, and when I say 8 different codes, we're talking about the mechanical code, plumbing code, the International Building Code as examples. On September 27th, as directed by the City Council, we did conduct additional public outreach. We had a community open house and where we discussed the International Residential Code, the International Energy Conservation Code, and the International Green Construction Code. More than 80 people attended, both in person and virtually, and the majority of the comments that we received that evening were in support of the adoption of the codes. Getting into some of the individual codes, the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code is applicable to single-family, multifamily, and commercial buildings. The components, the energy components of the code addresses the thermal envelope, heating and cooling systems, surface water heating, electrical power and lighting systems, and solar-ready zones. On the next slide, you'll see that the IRC, which is the International Residential Code, and the International Energy Conservation Code local amendments, there is an amendment for new single-family homes to make them EV capable. In other words, have the ability to have the capability for electric cars to be charged. And when we say EV capable, we're talking about installing a raceway for future wiring and reserving an electrical service panel space in the event that one buys a electric vehicle and they want to be able to have the ability to fast charge it in their home. On new multifamily and hotels, there was an amendment to make 20% of the parking spaces EV capable with 4% installed. And I do want to point out very quickly that we have recommendations from 2 boards, and the new multifamily and hotels, there was consensus between those 2 boards, but there was a difference of opinion on the single-family homes, which we'll get into in the later slides. For the EV capable charging in the International Residential and International Energy Conservation Code. We just want to point out some of the benefits. Residents can have these EV charging stations easily installed. They can contract with an electrical contractor or an electrician to install it, and because the infrastructure is there, it makes it much easier for the electrician to pull the wire and put in the breaker into the space that's reserved for that in the electric panel. It supports a net zero emissions goal. Some people may think of some of the disadvantages. The technology may change. The technology is changing constantly, and the electric circuit breaker may not be used because of some changes in technology. We don't know how quickly that'll happen, but we just felt it was important to point that out. And because you've got the infrastructure in there, there's added minimal expense to the homeowner to have that installed. The next item that's up for an amendment to the International Residential Code and the International Energy Conservation Code has to do with ceiling insulation. In our current code that we have adopted now, there is a ceiling insulation requirement of R38 in the 2015 code, residential code, versus R49, which is found in the proposed 2021 code. And you can see there on the slide the difference in the thicknesses of the insulation, 12 to 14 inches for R38 and 15 to 17 inches for the R49. In the diagram next to the insulation, we just put in what would have to happen in order to accommodate that additional thickness, some of which we're doing now as far as to accommodate the R38. That is what we're showing is a energy heel truss that is raised up in order to accommodate that additional thickness. Keep in mind that if we go with an R49, that heel truss would have to be higher. The one thing I do want to point out is that the representation that you see up there is for batt insulation. There is foam insulation that can be installed, which is much thinner, but the foam insulation itself is more expensive than the batt insulation. So we can go to the next slide. So what are the benefits? For R38, the benefits are you continue to have annual cost savings. The R38 will not increase the upfront costs that could result from higher exterior walls and roof heights. And what I think is important in Scottsdale is that there's a possibility it may conflict with zoning height restrictions, so it's just something to keep in mind. The R38 also avoids additional complexity and construction constraints. Versus the R49 benefits, it will result in a increased net savings over the life of the home for 30 years, and there is the improvement in the occupant comfort by having the additional insulation provided. Next, we want to talk about some of the major provisions in the 2021 International Green Construction Code. And as you can see up there, the provisions in the code addresses site, water, energy, environmental quality, and material resources. I think it's important to point out that some of the things that we're doing, as you can see up there on the slide, we're already doing in other areas of our Scottsdale revised code in terms of stormwater, for example. We have a stormwater provision. Many of those requirements are also found in the Green Construction Code. We've also got provisions for water conservation in the International Plumbing Code and energy provisions in the Energy Conservation Code. Moving to the next slide, we just want to point out what some of those significant changes are. We have low VOC interior materials and finishes, and VOC stands for volatile organic compounds. Basically, the best way I can describe it to you is if you're familiar with the smell of fresh carpet and the glue that's associated with the carpet, or a freshly painted house on the interior and the strong odors that you get, those are volatile organic compounds. And so what the code will be requiring, and that we're already seeing today, is lower VOCs where that smell is not as present, or you won't notice it as much. It also addresses heat island mitigation, the EV-ready charging infrastructure. It deals with construction waste management, where certain construction waste can be separated into recyclable or what might go to the landfill. Low impact building materials, water efficiency, which I think is very important to the council, and as far as indoor water requirements, but also outdoor water requirements, where we're not watering sidewalks, for example, and on-site photovoltaic or solar recharging abilities. So we just want to talk very briefly about the benefits if it's mandatory and some of the impacts. So the benefits are having a mandatory International Green Construction Code is that it reduces energy, water use, and waste over the life of the building. It improves indoor air quality. There's consistency and certainty because if it is mandatory, every commercial building that comes in for a permit will be required to adhere to this requirement. And it will demonstrate our continued regional and national leadership in green buildings. The impacts, if it's mandatory, yes, there will be some increased construction costs. There might be some debate or discussion as to how much or how little, but I think that it's safe to say that there will be some increased construction costs. Increased review and enforcement expenses to the city, which means that we would have to have additional staff or resources in order to review plans that are submitted to us for permitting to make sure that they're in compliance with the International Green Construction Code. The new requirements by some may be considered burdensome due to their unfamiliarity with these requirements. But the more we do that, obviously, hopefully they will learn from their experiences and they'll get more in the groove, so to speak, in order to comply with the code. And then some of the requirements may be difficult to achieve immediately, mainly because of the unfamiliarity with it. We did receive community input, and you can see some of the organizations that we reached out to that participated either at the Building Advisory Board of Appeals meetings or the Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission meetings, which leads us to the next slide, which is going to be the recommendations. And first off are the recommendations from the Building Advisory Board of Appeals. And the recommendations are the adoption of the International Residential Code and the International Energy Conservation Code with all amendments. They do not recommend EV-capable charging for single-family homes. They do support the EV charging infrastructure for multifamily and hotels, and they recommend maintaining the R38 installation for single-family homes. They also are recommending to Council regarding the International Green Construction Code, making it mandatory for zoning and planning bonuses, voluntary for all other commercial projects. And then we have recommendations from on the next slide, from the Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission. They too are recommending the adoption of the International Residential Code and the International Energy Conservation Code with all amendments. They are recommending EV charging capabilities for single-family and multifamily hotels. So there is a difference there where the Building Advisory Board of Appeals is not making that recommendation. The Scottsdale Advisory Environmental Advisory Commission is making that recommendation that council adopt that provision. They are also recommending that council adopt a provision for R49 ceiling insulation for new single-family homes. And they are also recommending the adoption of the International Green Construction Code as a mandatory code for new commercial and multifamily buildings. In a few minutes, we have 2 action items for the council to consider, but at this point, Mr. Mayor, I'll turn it back over.
Thank you, Mr. Clack. At this point, there are several speakers, so I'm going to open public input and comment. We have several speakers. Natalie Chrisman Lazar, and will be followed by Duran Watzchak. So please state your name and affiliation, and then address. And also, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Ortega, honorable council members. My name is Natalie Chrisman Lazar, and I reside at 7647 East Turquoise Avenue in Scottsdale, Arizona for the last 20-plus years. I am here before you as a representative and the chair of the Scottsdale Environmental Advisory Commission, or SEEK. As you know, SEEK is comprised of Scottsdale residents with expertise in engineering, planning, earth science, and/or business that you've appointed to provide guidance on environmental issues in the city. When we last spoke about code adoption, I expressed SEEK's overwhelming support for a mandatory green building code based on the IGCC that furthers not only Scottsdale's green building leadership, but also aligns with and implements the voter-approved 2035 general plan. A mandatory IGCC in Scottsdale can be implemented in a responsible and affordable manner with amendments that provide lots of options to comply. I am here also to echo our previous guidance and say that we're not alone in our recommendations. Your direction to staff at the last meeting discussing code adoption was to reach out to the public and gather additional input on the proposed provisions. In response, over 80 individuals took time out of their schedules to provide feedback at an open house led by city staff in late September. As noted in your packet starting on page 59, 10 questions were asked of community participants. The questions were specific and included all the major provisions of the IGCC as amended for implementation in Scottsdale. Overwhelmingly, the participant responses supported each of these provisions. In fact, 6 of the questions received only positive or neutral comments. In some instances, the negative comments that were received for the other 4 responses were that the proposed measures didn't go far enough. You've heard from experts in the building community that developers are not having a problem complying with similar requirements. In fact, costs are negligible with appropriate planning, and that the IGCC is proven to produce buildings with lower operational costs. Mayor Ortega, honorable council members, I respectfully ask you to listen to the feedback of Scottsdale residents that you requested and increase the overall quality of buildings in our city with a mandatory IGCC. A mandatory code saves time and levels the playing field for builders and developers by clearly identifying the rules that everyone must play by. The benefits of a mandatory code far outweigh the costs and hesitance about adopting something new. Our cleaner air, conserved resources, and mitigated urban heat island will reap dividends as they position our city for resilience and sustainability in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Duran Watzchak, and then Karen Parler. Once again, Duran Watzchak. Karen Potter, please come forward. Thank you. Okay. we will give another go for her. Julianne A.J. Anderson. Sorry, Julian. Julian A.J. Anderson.
It asked for full name, Mr. Mayor. I'm sorry.
What happened?
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Julian Anderson. I live at 8210 East El Claro Drive in Scottsdale, a resident of Scottsdale for 24 years. I'm here in my capacity as Vice Chair of the Building Advisory Board of Appeals for the City of Scottsdale, and I want to provide some insight into the Building Advisory Board of Appeals recommendations. First, I would like to say that the Building Advisory Board of Appeals has considered each of the recommendations that it has placed before you. It's done those with great care. It has tried to balance a variety of things: council's aims with the general plan, health and life safety, the goals of the various codes, and indeed the cost impacts to the residents of Scottsdale. For the building codes especially, while the initial cost burden, it is true, is borne by those nasty builders and developers, the fact of the matter is that it is always passed on to the residents or renters. Nothing is free. So we need to keep that in mind in times of high inflation. So I'll now address the three items that were discussed where the Building Advisory Board of Appeals has a different view from others. First, with regard to EV-capable charging for single-family homes. The argument for providing EV-capable for single-family homes is essentially that charging is not available for electric vehicles. And the fact is it is. Every garage has a 110-volt outlet. The issue is simply that the charging is slow. So it's not fair to say that you can't charge an electric vehicle currently. But further, I go on to tell you that the amendment as it is currently worded is poor. It is vague and it is particularly conflicting. I can read it to indicate that somebody in the city of Scottsdale is required to build a garage merely so that they have merely to fulfill the requirement that they have EV-capable charging. I can read it to say that you can avoid the thing altogether by simply building a carport and not a garage. I don't think that amendment is ready for prime time. In regard to roof insulation, the Building Advisory Board of Appeals supports the City Council staff recommendation to stay with R38 to R49. Mr. Clack explained why. The cost is significant. The impact on savings to the homeowner and the environment is minimal. Finally, with regard to the mandatory implementation of IGCC, the Building Advisory Board of Appeals does not oppose IGCC. It opposes the mandatory implementation of it at this time because it is also not ready for prime time. It's an overlay code. It has to trickle down and be able to match with all the other codes that it impacts. And in the packet that you have before you, that has not been done. You'll be in fact adopting a code that isn't ready for prime time. It is said that it's widely adopted. In fact, we researched and found that only 8 jurisdictions in the US have adopted as mandatory for all building classes at this time. Barbara recommends mandatory for zoning and planning bonuses and voluntary for all other multifamily residential and commercial building projects. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Regine M. Fellows and John Martinson.
Move it down a little bit, being shorter at work. Hello, I'm Regine Fellows, 25825 North 106 Way in Scottsdale, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council. It's a pleasure to be here commenting on this very important green measure. I am a longtime Scottsdale resident and owner of electric vehicles since 2015, driven over 80,000 miles electric. Since retiring in '03 and owning a successful small business, I have volunteered for nonprofits, including as chair of the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy. Today, I am education director on the board of the Scottsdale Electric Vehicle Association. So, EV-friendly building codes. Why is this important? What difference will your yes make today in our great city of Scottsdale? And why is regulation even necessary? 90% of EV charging happens at night, at home, in your garage. Fueling your EV is not like going to a gas station. Charging an EV is a lot more like charging your cell phone. You plug in at home or at work and you go and do something else. It's easy and it's convenient. And yet, there is a big segment of our Scottsdale residents who are left out of participating in the benefits of owning an EV. I'm talking about our service workers, hotel and restaurant staff, teachers, firemen, healthcare, hospital workers, people who live in apartments and condos, and some of whom earn low to moderate income. And what EV benefits are they missing out on? Well, the big four are lower vehicle costs over the lifetime. A Tesla Model 3, surprisingly, beat out a Toyota Corolla for lifetime cost. It has lower maintenance cost. EVs have 1/10 the number of moving parts of a gas vehicle, no oil changes. Lower fuel cost. An EV is typically 1/4 the cost of a gas car for fuel. And now you have a chance to get a tax credit from the IRA, lowering the initial cost of the vehicle by as much as $7,500 or $4,000 for a used EV. And there are over 115 EV models today, some at price points equivalent to an economy gas car. So you can imagine what kind of difference that would make to these folks, many of whom are living paycheck to paycheck. So if you live in an apartment or a condo in Scottsdale, you very likely have zero ability to charge your EV near your home. So removing this obstacle by ensuring that a minimum amount of charging infrastructure is installed at construction in apartments and condos is a simple but vital action. Lastly, will the builders do it on their own? Well, we are seeing that across the country that slowly builders are seeing that buyers want EVs, but construction is happening more in high-end, not in multifamily. And I just see now that the Arizona Multifamily Association is opposing this. So these people will be left out unless you help. So please say yes to EV-friendly building codes to ensure that we can offer this benefit to everyone who wants it, not just the well-to-do in Scottsdale. So please cast your vote for IGCC mandatory and IECC and IRC with option A. And let's join Flagstaff, Avondale, Sedona, and Tucson to be one of the first 5 cities in Arizona to be EV-friendly. Thank you.
We have John Martinson and Linnea Brudenell.
Yes, my name is John Martinson. I live at 31421 North 69th Street in Scottsdale. This is regarding number 18, adoption of residential energy and green construction code updates. Number 1, IGCC as mandatory with proposed amendments. Number 2, IECC with proposed amendments. Number 3, IRC with proposed amendments. Number 4, option A, amendments to the IECC and IRC. Let's future-proof Scottsdale. This vote is a vote for developers and builders of new construction. These developers and builders will become more competitive. Yes, that's right. EV owners will favor renting and owning properties with charging infrastructure already in place. With the continuing growth trends spurred by newcomers moving here from other states, Scottsdale will be a preferred place to live for EV owners, supporting our real estate community. This vote is a vote for economic development. Tourists arriving here on road trips will look to whether our city is friendly to EV charging. I always select my hotels by whether they have EV charging. One of the most exciting of the 115 EV models is the Lucid electric cars. They're made in Casa Grande, Arizona. Can we lure more automakers to our valley? EVs are good for business and employment. This vote is a vote for low to middle income Scottsdale residents who will be able to drive cars with lower lifetime costs in fueling and servicing. This vote is a vote for renters and condo buyers who will have a basic level of readiness for charging capability. This vote is a vote for the health and well-being of Scottsdale residents. This vote is a vote for clean air. This choice is good for our quality of life here in Scottsdale. Dr. James Bristol could not be here tonight, but submitted a written comment regarding EV effect on air quality and disease avoidance in children and older adults. This vote is a vote for keeping Scottsdale an attractive place for people to live in and to visit. This is a simple and easy vote. The cost to builders is minor. When we consider the major benefits of adding upfront charging infrastructure where it is most needed, the choice is easy. This is important to do now because the costs of retrofitting later are 4 to 6 times greater, and that is just the average. We have projects in Scottsdale, like Scottsdale waterfront condos, that have received much higher retrofit estimates. In fact, prohibitively higher estimates. My own experience in retrofitting a home required running conduit from the panel above my roof, down an exterior wall, and through the wall at substantial cost and delay due to permitting. And lastly, this is a chance to be one of the first 5 Arizona cities to lead the charge on EV-friendly building codes. We will be joining Flagstaff, Sedona, Tucson, and Avondale. These cities realize that EVs are increasingly popular and that their owners will want to visit and live in places that can fuel their EVs conveniently. Let's be ahead of the curve. Please cast your vote for these EV-friendly building codes, mandatory IGCC and IECC IRC with option A. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinson. Linda Brudenell, and Gerald Leenertz. Ms. Brudenell.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. Linnea Brudenell, 8576 East Indian School Road, Unit J. My name is Linnea, and I'm a licensed architect. I work here in Scottsdale. I'm the Director of Sustainability for Nelson Partners, an architecture and planning firm with offices in Austin and Scottsdale. As the Director of Sustainability here, I have focused my career for the last 10 years exclusively on mandatory and voluntary sustainability and resiliency compliance in the commercial sector across many, many different markets, internationally and nationally, to ensure our projects are not only compliant with energy codes, local amendments, and required sustainability ordinances, but also delivered on time and on budget. In the post-pandemic design and construction market, our clients and their financing sources are demanding high-performance buildings with healthy indoor air quality, stringent water conservation, electrification, energy-efficient buildings, and as well as energy and water resiliency planning. Water conservation is among the top most requested feature of our high-performance buildings. I have personally been in the proverbial trenches, and I'm still in the proverbial trenches, working on successful IGCC projects here in Scottsdale. Compliance with the IGCC is currently a development incentive that's used during the planning and zoning process. It's straightforward and easily understood that adds zero cost to the project if it is built in from conceptual design, and compliance information is included in the construction documents and contract specifications clearly stating the IGCC requirements for bidding. Additionally, many of our projects require third-party green building rating, such as LEED or Green Globes, to qualify for financing. Banks are now requiring this because of a building product using a TPC, third-party certification, is proven to be of higher quality and lower operational costs. IGCC compliance for this type of project parallels the owner's project requirements for the TPC. The IGCC, as proposed, is heavily amended and provides many options for compliance. It is essentially an IGCC light. For example, solar is a requirement in the IGCC. However, the proposed local amendments allow for other compliance options. Transitioning to a mandatory version of the IGCC should be painless, and the market is familiar with this code. Many of the proposed provisions in the IGCC are codified in other markets. For example, in Austin, where our other office is, 50% of the construction waste diversion is required for all new commercial construction projects. There is also a code requirement now for all commercial multifamily projects to provide equal volume trash and recycling collection. In other climate zones, there are mandatory code provisions to prevent hurricane damage, provide earthquake and seismic protection, and structural allowances for snow loads. We live in the desert where extreme heat and drought require a mandatory code to protect our limited water and energy resources, promote indoor air quality, and resource conservation. We support the adoption of the IGCC as mandatory and as proposed with local amendments. In addition, I'd also like to add that the local AIA chapter has also signed a letter of support for the mandatory adoption of the IGCC. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next we have Gerald Leenertz.
Thank you, City Council, for listening to everybody today. My name is Gerald, and I live at around 68th and McDowell in the historic neighborhood of Village Grove. We have been there for 6 years, really enjoy it. I had a script, I was gonna stick to it, but you know, at the end of the day, to me, what IGCC, IECC, IRC means is that we're being thoughtful. We're thinking about who we are as a society, and we're thinking about what it means to live and be a part of, you know, our home. And to me, we need to think hard about how do we create a beautiful landscape while using little to no potable water? How do we, you know, help have a better air quality, have, you know, better quality of life? And we do that by adopting these measures that promote building in a more sustainable way. So I mostly want to, you know, really be thoughtful about what we're doing here. And so all I really want to say is that I appreciate that this is on the ballot, and I hope that, you know, we vote to make this mandatory, make IGCC mandatory. You know, IECC and IRC, you know, need to be included. Option A needs to be approved. You know, we should have EV installment easy to use for when electric cars are the way of the future. I also would like to say I oppose option B. We need to increase the R value. There's a lot more that we can do here to make a more sustainable, healthier culture. So with that, again, thank you. I want to respect your all's time, so that is all I have.
Thank you very much, and I see you have family members here, and I want to say how much we appreciate you know, the family. As you said, participation is about our future. I have for you, your son, a Scottsdale ornament. Here you go, this year. Thank you for being so patient. And is that Grandma in the, here? I have one for Grandma, too. So, thank you for coming here, being with us. You have amazing patience and also attention, really, greatly appreciated. We'll go to Suzanne Brown and Barney Gonzalez. Suzanne's with the Scottsdale Area Association of Realtors.
Thank you for that introduction. I am Suzanne Brown. I'm the Director of Community and Government Affairs for the Scottsdale Area Association of Realtors. I'm here this evening to speak in our support of Scottsdale's proposed energy conservation building code changes for single-family residential homes to require electric vehicle charging station infrastructure. As representatives of the housing industry, we have previously been asked to weigh in on the proposed building code changes. Back in August, we had voiced our support of the proposed amendments to the building code, which impact residential housing. Today, we continue to stand in support of those changes. When our members sell Scottsdale, they are selling all the features that a home has to offer: comfort, convenience, neighborhood amenities, safety, efficiency, and a whole host of other things that go into that home buying decision. The industry also demands that we anticipate the future needs of homeowners. It is estimated that 25% of the U.S. households will have at least one electric car by the end of 2025. Put into perspective, this change for residential new builds is a remarkably small cost requirement and is a chance to get out ahead of a fast-growing trend. The cost to add the EV capability after the fact is far more expensive. Because the proposed change does not require more than a minimum of a single raceway receptacle and a reserved breaker space to be installed, this allows for the flexibility of the homeowner to accommodate the technical specifications of their electric vehicle, which can vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. Similar to pre-wiring for security systems, sound systems, and cable throughout a house, things that 20 years ago were not part of a new build's infrastructure, that time has come to add EV charging capability. In conclusion, I'm proud to restate that the Scottsdale Area Association of Realtors is in full support of the proposed changes presented in the new section R404.4 and R404.4.1 for the Scottsdale Building Code. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Barney Gonzalez, and then I will call again if Karen Potter's here.
Thank you again, Mayor Ortega, Vice Mayor Mr. Durham, council people. I'm here as a private citizen to voice my opinion on specifically the codes on the EVs. Now, the EV code in the green code has two options. Either we make it mandatory or not, as far as concising it down. I've gone to the building advisory board when they've met and they've talked about it. I've been to a couple open houses. I'm here as a private citizen, not as a planning or zoning commissioner or any representative for the city of Scottsdale. I'm here because I believe that I could probably afford an EV, and I probably could afford to retrofit my house for an EV. But I have a lot of neighbors who will not be able to afford this. I have a real problem with anything that says it's mandatory. Most of the houses that live in the middle part of town of Scottsdale, from Indian Bend south all the way to Roosevelt, bounded either side by Granite Reef. These houses were built in the 50s by John Hall, Butler Homes, and a few allies. Some of these houses, which especially the ones that are supplied by SRP, only have a 100 amp service. Now, to change a 100 watt service, to be able to make it work with an EV, if you get the same EVs, which are usually used by the American companies, but not typically by all foreign car manufacturers, will be upwards of over $2,000, I estimated, just in rehabilitating these older structures to allow them to have these EV charging systems. I have no problem. As you probably know, you don't normally say, but I agree with everything that was said tonight. They're part of the future. They're great. Everything's wonderful about it. But the problem is when you make it a stand in saying that everybody has to follow this, makes it pretty hard for some people to afford it. My recommendation tonight, personally, is to not take the demand to make it so that somebody does not have a choice. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Karen Potter. And before I called on Duran Waschuk, but he was not in attendance, so please continue, Ms. Potter.
Good evening, Mayor Ortega and City Council members. My name is Karen Potter, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of SWEEP, the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. SWEEP is a public interest organization dedicated to helping Arizonans save money on their electric bills by also reducing energy consumption. SWEEP is proud to be here tonight to support the 3 I-codes that are in front of you today for consideration: the 2021 International Residential Code, the International Energy Conservation Code, and the International Green Construction Code, as well as Option A. By approving the 2021 I-codes in front of you today, with provisions such as the EV charging infrastructure requirements, the City of Scottsdale will unlock significant benefits and significant consumer savings. The 2021 I-codes represent cost-effective solutions for the City of Scottsdale. And these are cost-effective solutions to meet its future and current energy needs, and to save citizens and businesses money on their energy bills now and in the future. Ensuring our homes and buildings are constructed using proven methodologies and technologies in the 2021 I-codes, it will deliver substantial economic and environmental benefits for the city and guarantee superior building performance. And utilizing a recent study from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, one of the U.S. Department of Energy's national laboratories, SWEEP was able to calculate that the City of Scottsdale and its residents stand to benefit significantly from the adoption of the 2021 IECC in the following ways. 1, Scottsdale homeowners can gain more than $100,000 in economic benefits annually with energy savings attributed to the 2021 code cycle. 2, Scottsdale residents can annually save upwards of 4,500 megawatt hours of energy. And 3, in the adoption of the 2021 code cycle, more than 1,100 metric tons of CO2 can be reduced annually. So with the adoption of these codes, the City of Scottsdale can help to reap significant consumer, economic, and environmental benefits. And specifically in the IECC, as a suite of model national building codes adopted by state and local jurisdictions, it is, in essence, to ensure a minimum of durability, quality, health, and safety. And the benefits of these codes are compounded when they are adopted together with the IRC and the IGCC. And with that tonight, I would just like to emphasize again that we urge the city to adopt all these codes together, as well with option A for tonight. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. And with that, we are concluded with public comment. At this point, we will look at any questions or a motion. I see Councilwoman Janik.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to thank Michael Clack and Anthony Floyd, our staff that works so hard on all these regulations and documents. It's very difficult work. It's very hard to understand for council people with all these initials and acronyms. And I want to thank all of you for staying, for sharing your thoughts, and I especially want to thank that young guy in the front who has had very good behavior. So thank you. And with that being said, I'd like to make a motion to adopt ordinance number 4575, resolutions number 12499, 12503, adopting the 2021 International Residential Code, parentheses IRC, and the 2021 International Energy Conservation Code, IECC, including all amendments in Attachment 2 and 3, with an effective date of January 7th, 2023. Additionally, add EV-capable charging infrastructure requirement for new single-family homes.
Second. Okay, we have Vice Mayor Durham.
Thank you, Mayor. When I was a lawyer, some judges did something they called hot tubbing, which is to take two experts on opposite sides of an issue and force them to argue with each other or to come to some kind of conclusion. I wanted to see if Mr. I've lost my sheet. If Mr. Anderson and Ms. Lazar would be able to discuss the issue of the insulation. I mean, you have opposing positions on whether it ought to be 38 or 48. And I'm particularly interested in the issue of, Mr. Anderson said it would be a significant cost to build the heel truss. And I'm also interested in the issue of, here in Arizona, the cool air sits on the floor, according to physics, which is unlike Minnesota, where my son lives, in where you need more insulation in the roof, because that's where the hot air congregates. And so I can understand much more insulation in Arizona. I'm not sure why it's necessary here. So if the two of you could give an...
Mr. Vice Mayor, we closed public comment.
Oh.
And I would say that the purpose would be to direct to staff, perhaps, any technical question. Because as you said, experts can, their testimonies of record already, but as members of a building advisory board, I would prefer to have the staff sort of not adjudicate this, but just answer your question as to what the different viewpoints may be. And so that would be, then we could act on that.
All right.
You've pointed out the differences, and I'd like the staff to kind of respond to that. And we also have the green building architect expert as well. So I'd prefer to call on our experts, so to speak.
Okay. All right. Could you answer that?
Okay. I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah. The first question is, Mr. Anderson said that there was a significant cost to the heel truss. And actually, I have another question for you while you're here, so that would be good. So Mr. Anderson said there was a significant cost to the heel truss. And the second issue is here in Arizona, the cool air, the time when we need the insulation is in the summer, and that's the time when the cool air sort of is in the lower part of a building, and so the insulation in the roof is less significant. And the third is that in your presentation, you said that R38 will not increase costs. So are we, it sounded like you were suggesting a change to R38, and I was confused by that. Are we currently using R38 right now?
Yes, sir. Under our, excuse me, under our current codes, the 2015 codes, we're using R38. The 2021 International Residential Code has a recommendation of R48. It will increase the height of the heel truss if you're using batt insulation. Thank you. If we're using batt insulation, it will increase the height of that heel truss, which means a little more engineering, a little bit more material being used and labor as well to put that in. So how much more it would be, I'm not really able to tell you exactly how much more it would be, but it would be a cost increase if you were to go that using the bat insulation. Additionally, some of the other things that we found out in the course of our research and everything, we had some energy raters who were maintaining that what they're seeing out in the field isn't exactly to what the code is requiring being installed. So by keeping the R38, either way it goes, whether or not we go with the R49 or the R38, there's going to be an increase of focus and emphasis on making sure we get that right in the plan review process, not in the field, but in the plan review process, so that the drawings accurately depict what is going on, and then the inspectors, all they have to do is go by what's in the code. And that was part of the reason for the recommendation that I made, that Mr. Anderson told you about earlier, to go with the R38, making sure that we get that right. Plus, there was also concerns in that how much more is it worth? What's the cost benefit in that? And it gets down to some potential diminishing returns. You're not getting as much back in the insulation, but I don't want to downplay that too much or upplay it, because there is, it's a fact, there is increased performance in terms of cooling and maintaining the coolness of a structure here in Scottsdale.
Yeah, and you just referenced that. What about the energy savings where we mostly need insulation during the summer and not during the winter?
Well, excuse me.
Yeah, where the cool air, as they say, sort of congregates towards the bottom half of a building.
Right. The cool air, the thing that the insulation will do in the house and the thermal envelope, here in our region of the country, we're more concerned about keeping houses and buildings cool. So we don't want that cool air to escape to the outside, and we don't want the hot air from the exterior of the building to migrate inside. And so the additional insulation will benefit that. In the more northern climes like Minnesota, Buffalo, New York, for example, that's been in the news recently, you want to keep that heat in the house, right, and you don't want it escaping to the outside, and you don't want that cold air coming in. So that benefits you in terms of the thicker insulation is a benefit in the northern climates as well. So there's benefits both for the northern climate and the interior climate. I think somebody said it best that I heard a few days ago. When you talk about the R value, if you think about your clothes, when it's really cold outside, you want to put on a thicker coat, jacket, you warm up, you layer up to keep your body warm. When it's hot outside, you go a little bit less, you're not going to wear that heavy jacket because it's going to maintain that coolness inside. Houses don't exactly work that way as our bodies do, because we want to maintain that coolness and we want to maintain the efficiency of the air conditioning equipment to keep our houses cool with as low a cost as possible.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Caputi, Councilmember Milhaven.
I assume that we're going to take this as action 1 first and action 2 second. So I'm going to make my comments just about action 1 at first. I think we absolutely, I agree with Councilwoman Janik, need to adopt the latest updated building codes. That'll put us at the cutting edge of most cities of the valley. That's a place we already are, and I think we, of course, want to stay there. I think everyone on this council cares passionately about sustainability, myself included. I think we just have different ideas about how we actually get to certain places. So I support the recommendations of our Building Advisory Board. I think that they are the experts in this area. I work with electricians every day, and being up to date on issues of health and safety in the field is completely critical, as I know. The building codes are appropriate for addressing issues of health, safety, and welfare, not for overreaching regulations more appropriate in our zoning codes. I think we need to balance the costs and benefits, which really haven't been analyzed for us. We're hearing a lot of it's more expensive, it's less expensive, but I haven't actually heard anything making that argument that we're going to save money. And I really feel strongly that we can't interfere with the free market here. Government should not be micromanaging private businesses and our individual choices. The general plan was mentioned a couple times. It actually also says in our general plan housing element H2.3 that we should reduce government financial and regulatory constraints and whenever possible offer expeditious processing of development proposals and building permits to enhance housing affordability, which I completely agree with. So I don't necessarily support mandating the EV-capable charging for single-family homes. I think it's been said, people plug their electric vehicles into a GFI in their garage. There really aren't sufficient barriers to retrofitting a new single-family home to justify a mandate on this. The market is going to provide it. When people ask for it, the builders will make sure that it happens. The market is working correctly. Remember that most homes in Scottsdale are already existing. So we're talking about maybe 0.3% of our going forward housing stock. It feels good to say that we're making this mandate, but what is the impact, actually? We still haven't quantified that. I think that if we cared about having a meaningful impact on climate, we would be looking at housing options that use land and water more efficiently, which would have a much greater bang for the buck. And most importantly, which hasn't really been brought up here yet tonight, the technology is changing rapidly. We've got, our military is already looking at wireless charging stations. I've heard talk about having solar panels on cars, and Toyota is currently testing hydrogen fuel cells at the moment. So we're gonna force everyone to pay for things that they may actually not end up using, which I can't support that. So I would be okay with multifamily EV ready, although I do want to just make the tiny comment that taking up valuable parking spots in our commercial buildings is probably not going to go over that well with the people of Scottsdale, but again, I'm not going to bother giving my opinion on multifamily. I don't feel as strongly about that mandate. So I would like to make an alternate motion to adopt ordinance number 4575, resolution number 12499-12503, adopting the 2021 International Residential Code and 2021 International Energy Conservation Code, including all amendments in attachment 2 and 3 with an effective date of January 7, 2023, and including option B, retaining minimum ceiling insulation value of R38 instead of R49 for new single-family homes.
Okay, I hear an alternate motion and a second. I will be able to speak to both motions and applicable to, I do not support the alternate motion. The worst tax that we can experience in life is poor insulation, poor windows, under-insulated places where we live, where we work. That is the worst continuing tax that is addressed by these provisions, whether they deal with electrical, plumbing, or insulation. It is our job to look at public benefit, and many times I see builders proclaim that they provide R60 in attic insulation, and they're very proud to say that. Or they're very proud to say, well, the minimum is R38, but we provide market-wise and appealing savings to the buyer. There's some other things that are important about adoption of the primary motion, and I would be voting against the alternate motion since it is on the floor. I have a couple other things to say. That is that these codes have been thoroughly studied and presented through the AIA architects. I happen to be a member of that as well. And they have been tested nationally and they have been debated nationally. And at this point, we're down, after all those complexities, to two issues. One about insulation, which is recommended, and to somehow feel that we're wiser and older and wiser than what is adaptable and what has been accepted just for pennies in terms of cost, but yet costing or returning dollars over time. That is our responsibility to do. Second part, there was some discussion about insulation, so I will speak to that. Now, insulation is provided in the roof to deflect heat. Deflect heat, that's the main job of insulation in the summer. We get a lot of intensity, and yes, if we're fortunate to have air conditioning, it contains our cooling or the lower temperature. But the role essentially is for deflecting the heat and giving a lag time for that heat to get through to the space, because as soon as the heat hits the livable space, it's got to be countered by the coolness underneath. So that is the role. Yes, it will help contain the cool air that costs us energy and so forth. Equally, at the same time, when we have a winter as hard as we have them here, if it gets to 50 degrees or 45 degrees, we want to preserve the heat that's here, and so whatever's generated and going in our utility bills, that's important, but also to stop the coldness from penetrating in. The coldness that's outside is also, we're trying to deflect that. That's the role of the insulation. It's equally, there are other provisions that ask that we insulate the slabs. So heat and coolness, you can lose a lot because of the stem of the building. No one will argue that we should go back to single pane because, builders can save a lot of money. And that's just great. It's a wonderful market condition, and why should we interfere with that? Well, we're Scottsdale, and Scottsdale is, we're not going to do it partially and then somehow give an exemption about a basic like roof insulation. The other fact is, one can argue, and I heard this argument in the early days back in '86 when they said, gee, sprinkler your buildings, that's just going to add another $1.20 to the cost of of your house. Wow. It could be voluntary. Let's make it voluntary. Well, you know who was testifying in that case. The firemen were saying, we're going to save lives. The insurance people were saying, your insurance bill is going to be substantially lower, and it's not voluntary. We made it mandatory. I was here when the discussion was completed here in this Kiva, and the same home builders were saying, oh my gosh, it's going to cost $1.20, and look how many lives have been saved, and so forth. So we do have a distressed situation in our environment where we're short of water, where every drop counts, and where the electrical provisions that we're doing are for maximum efficiency. Yes, I hope for better technology, but the cost of an empty conduit, believe me, an empty conduit from the vicinity of a panel to anywhere near where a car could be parked with a pull wire is so minimal. Any builder would add that as, say, oh, it's got a perk on that as well. Or, let the buyer beware, right? Let the buyer beware that there's insulation that got cut out of this code by us up here because, we were thought that we're so much wiser. So it is a matter of being, it's not even penny wise. It's totally foolish to try to any subterfuge for marketability of our Scottsdale standards. At this point, I don't know if there's more discussion on the alternate motion. Did you want to speak to your alternate second? Otherwise, we'll vote on it shortly and then move to the main motion.
Well, there's several other people who would like to speak, so I don't know that we need to move to a vote. But I did want to comment on the matter at hand, but before I do that, I'd like to point out that our rules of procedure do not preclude the vice mayor from asking anybody here a question if they'd like to. And then I'd also like to remind the mayor that you're to call on folks in the order that we request to speak. With regard to the issue here, my thinking or my questions were along the lines of Vice Mayor Durham's, that my understanding is the staff recommendation is to stay with 38. It really relates to enforcement and conflicts with other building codes and building requirements that might make the R49 not practical, and that the R38 was much more enforceable. And then I think what Mr. Clack taught me was insulation's not a linear relationship. So twice the insulation doesn't give me twice the comfort or twice the impact of the insulation. And so the difference between 38 and 49 is really quite small, but the conflict with other codes really creates other issues. And Mr. Clack, maybe you could expand on that for me.
Well, one of the things that I did point out is with the higher heel truss, you're going to raise the height of the overall roof, which may be in conflict with some of our height requirements for certain zoning applications. That was one of the things that I was pointing out earlier, where there could be a conflict. And the enforcement is something that energy raters, independent energy raters, has informed us about. And looking at it, we just want to make sure we get that right. And that was pretty much it.
Okay, so I'm supportive of the motion with regard to the main part of the motion. For EV capable, I could really go either way, but I really feel strongly that we should accept staff's recommendation about retaining R38. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Councilwoman remotely, Councilwoman Whitehead.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, and thank you for explaining how insulation works. It's one of the most mundane and effective tools we have to lower people's utility bills, lower urban heat. And unfortunately, air might be cooler and go to the bottom of the house, but air mixes, and heat in the attic is one of the biggest causes of discomfort and high utility bills. So I absolutely support Councilwoman Janik's motion. And I also want to point out that having a spot in the a spot for a breaker is really cannot be stressed enough an insignificant cost for the EV in the houses. And I also want to just say that codes is exactly what we do, and I really appreciated the speaker, Linnea's, comparing these codes to the codes that make sure that people don't die when we have earthquakes, codes that are in other parts of the country to protect from roofs caving in from snow. So I am enthusiastically supporting Councilwoman Janik's motion, and I'm actually very honored to be part of this discussion. Scottsdale's conservation ethic is just many generations long. And we just, as a city, have always had the ability to dream big dreams, come together as a community. And I cannot believe the broad group of stakeholders that have come together to support this and then get the job done. I mean, I think it's just part of our DNA. And I do want to thank you know, the Coalition of Greater Scottsdale, the American Lung Association, Arizona Forward, a 53-plus-year-old business group that works on keeping our state healthy environmentally, Arizona Institute of Architects, and its Phoenix Metro chapter, Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, Experience Scottsdale weighed in, and so did SAR. So and that's just a sample. So that's typical. That's how, you know, we get things done in the city. So with that, I will let others speak.
Thank you. Councilwoman Littlefield, Councilwoman Caputi.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, sir, very much for all the work you and your staff has done to put this together. I'd also like to thank the commissions and the advisory board. all the people who have been active and spent their time and efforts on bringing this to us to look at. Was going to support Councilwoman Janik's motion with a second, but the mayor beat me to it. So I do support her motion, and I will be supporting it in our vote. I think that it's important if we do this at all, we do it right, and we make it happen. Thank you.
Councilwoman Caputi, Vice Mayor Durham.
Just really quickly, the example that you gave, Mayor, about mandating sprinklers, and I think it was just, there was a comment about hurricanes and different things. I mean, that's my exact point. We certainly should be mandating code requirements that take care of health and safety and life. That's absolutely what we should be doing. I'm simply saying that we should question the mandating of extra goodies. But either way, I'm really excited that as a council here tonight, it seems that either way, we are going to adopt these base upgrades to our codes, and I think that's a very good thing. Also, I just want to, one last little comment. The payback period for changing the insulation from R38 to R49 is, I believe, around 177 years. So again, when we do cost benefits, I do think that that should come into play. Thank you.
Okay, Vice Mayor Durham, and then myself.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure if it's appropriate to make another alternative motion at this time, but I would move to support the staff's recommendations, which is the mandatory adoption of the IGCC with the addition of option A and with the adoption of option B. I don't think anybody's arguing about whether we should insulate houses. The issue is how much insulation do we need, and I haven't heard any evidence that would indicate that the benefits of this added insulation outweigh the costs. And one thing I would also add to that is I would like to ask if Mr. Clack could report back to us in 6 months about the success of increasing enforcement to make sure we have R38.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I hear a second, and apparently the first in, first out rule will apply. I have to comment about a couple things here. Sure. That part of the testimony mentioned that 80% of the homes are already built, or perhaps, and there's a remainder of multifamily. The reference was made of any hardship in providing an EV capable. That only, what we're considering today, only applies to new construction, okay? So it should not be intimidating to anyone who may have listened and heard differently, okay? It is also true that when people gut houses completely and gut the shell, and then they are come before the city, sometimes they're caught, and then we tell them, you must sprinkler that house. It may not have had sprinklers before, but it exceeded a certain percent of improvements. And so that is clarified as well. Builders understand that, and builders should understand that we have a level playing field, okay? The question of whether or not staff came up with this alternate based on whether or not a truss matters or not is, in my opinion, as an architect, somewhat irrelevant. I don't see personally, when you look at the trusses that are used nowadays and when they're built nowadays, there's no significant cost there. And that's my 40 years of experience. I find in Scottsdale, they're more concerned about a deeper truss so you can put a recessed light in there and the insulation, okay? So remember also, when they say R38, that doesn't mean 38 inches, right? Or R48. What is an R38 bat?
About 14 inches.
14 inches? 12 inches, you know what I mean? So these thicknesses do relate to life and safety, because, you know, when you save money on your utilities, you can feed yourself a little better. You have a little bit more money to go out and enjoy our nightlife or take a family out. When you don't, and there's enough air pockets in all this discussion that I don't need a proof to say, and we will vote on a alternate motion. I had to distinguish between, first of all, with Councilwoman Caputi, did you have excluding the 48-inch?
Yeah, I
Okay.
wanted the action number 1 the way it is, and I want the option B, not the option A.
Okay, so you're not going along with mandatory. I just want to clarify this so you're saying no mandatory, and you also want a thinner insulation. Just to clarify.
Take 200 years to get the
I'm not, your motion
Yes,
is not, you know, we can prove that or disprove it, however you want to do it, because insulation settles over time. There's other factors. So, to clarify, in your instance, you're also advocating, Vice Mayor, that the insulation be reduced to 38. I
No.
heard.
No, I'm saying we should keep it where it is.
Well, it is at 38.
Which is
And the
currently
new
our
code,
38.
but adopting the new code that recommends 48, or 49, excuse me, is, you're making that a reduction in the code that is spoken for in the First Amendment.
It's not a reduction, it'd be keeping our current standards, and as I understand it, we haven't been consistently enforcing the current standards, and that's why I'd like Mr. Clack to come back in 6 months and tell us how this is working out. So I would keep our current standard of R38.
And let me respond to that a bit, because again, I'm just trying to clarify where you're coming from as well as where you're coming from. When codes are adopted, staff is trained. Staff is trained to be specific according to the, excuse me? What I want to, yes, but I want to clarify his secondary add-on to your add-on, okay? So that's my job, to try to clarify so everyone knows what you're voting on. So you are proposing that it be mandatory. Okay, so let's clear that one up. You're proposing that it not be mandatory. Is that correct? Okay. Excuse me? Okay, so you're both mandatory.
On the IGCC.
Okay, yeah, and I want to clarify with, okay, mandatory is the next step, but I thought you mentioned mandatory along the way. Okay, so you're wanting the code. The primary motion was the code with the provisions and then also speaking for the mandatory aspect on the next code. That's the main motion.
No, wait.
You covered all the
No, on the main motion, it was just action 1 and option A,
Yes,
not option B.
okay.
We could vote on that separate if we want, but
Good.
we've got enough going right
Good.
now, so.
Okay, so because there was discussion about mandatory or not mandatory and whether it was, well, okay. So at this point, to double clarify, the building code, sorry, City Attorney, I'm just trying to clarify where the motions are because things are flying over here.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I'm a bit confused as well and wanted to clarify the second alternate motion that Vice Mayor Durham made. So were you intending to make the motion for action 1 to adopt ordinance number 4575 and resolution number 12499 and 12503 with both option A and B?
Yes, my motion is identical to the staff recommendation.
And then just to clarify, we're getting to the green building code action item next. We haven't, I think that Councilwoman Caputi's point has been, you said the
I-
IGCC, and I think you really meant the IRC.
I'm sorry, I thought the IGCC was part of the main motion. So, yes, I would, my motion then would be simply to take action 1, which is to adopt both option A and B. I'm sorry.
Very good. So you've
So-
got 2 alternate motions, Mayor?
But they
and then
appear
the
to be
main
saying,
motion.
but they appear to be saying the same thing to
Yeah,
me.
Betty's and Tom's are-
That they want.
No,
Okay.
if I may, Mayor,
Okay.
the second alternate motion, which will be voted on first,
Right.
is to adopt ordinance number 4575 and resolution number 12499 and 12503 with both option A and B. The second alternate motion is to adopt that ordinance and those resolutions with only option B. And the third alternate motion is to adopt that ordinance and those resolutions in action 1 with only option A. So you've covered, I think, all of the possibilities.
Okay, I just wasn't sure whether they crossed over or not. Okay, so we're gonna vote on, in summary, okay? Let's summarize, as you just did, Vice Mayor's option, because I'm reading it that he wants R38, and somehow he was trying to stipulate a stipulation of 6 months, which is not a part of a stipulation to come back with information. Okay, so I want to clarify that as well, because in the training process, we don't have well, so the action is asking for that according to Vice Mayor. If you support that, are there any other questions? Councilwoman Whitehead, and then I still see City Attorney, so Councilwoman Whitehead.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. I just want to point out that virtually all the speakers, other than the gentleman from the Building Advisory Board, spoke in favor of Councilwoman Janik's motion, which is to adopt the ERC and the Energy Conservation Codes with just option A. So I also want to point out that it is my understanding that these codes are very flexible. If the one thing Scottsdale does well is to accommodate our developers, especially when it comes to costs. So if in fact the developer does not want to do the added insulation, they have the option just to make sure that they are compliant with the R38 throughout. And I also want to point out that unlike those of us up on the dais and me virtually, the International Code Council that spent several years to get to these recommendations is very well qualified to do that and would not adopt codes that were not ready for prime time. And so these are well vetted codes by the national experts, including our very own expert, Anthony Floyd. And again, just to reiterate, that insulation is mundane and effective, and there is an option for those builders that don't want to do the R48. So I just want to make sure, because it is getting confusing for people to recognize that the speakers we heard and the letters we wrote were in support of Councilwoman Janik's motion, which was to adopt the International Residential Code and the International Energy Conservation Code with option A, which makes houses EV capable. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will call on Councilmember Millhaven, noting that you seconded his alternate motion as well as Councilwoman Caputo's. So you seconded both alternate motions.
Yeah, I just
Councilmember
thought everybody ought to have
and
a chance to have a
Councilwoman
point of view.
Littlefield.
I thought we should have every option. I just want to point out, if Vice Mayor Durham wants to additionally add to have staff report back in 6 months to see if there were ways to reconcile other codes with the R49, that is entirely appropriate. and that was what I seconded, if Councilwoman Durham wants to leave that in his motion.
Anything else?
Council member, is that what your intention was?
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Okay, so you are amending a stipulation about code enforcement or reporting back, but at this point, we will vote on the alternate motion, and please register your vote.
Which
Mr. Durham, your
Thank you.
Oh, Councilwoman Whitehead, no.
Thank you. The alternate motion fails. Now we'll turn to alternate motion by Ms. Caputi, and I want that restated just for the record. It does vary from the base motion, and let's clarify that.
Yes, I'm happy to do that if Councilwoman Caputi would like. I believe the motion was to adopt ordinance number 4575 and resolution number 12499 and 12503 with option B only. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, we see no further discussion. Please register your vote.
Councilwoman Whitehead is a no.
The alternate motion fails, 5-2. Next, we are at the main motion, and the main motion may be restated, but because we still have another code to vote on, let's restate that one directly.
Happy to do that, Mayor. Adopt ordinance number 4575, resolution number 12499 and 12503 with option A only.
Please register your vote.
Councilwoman Whitehead is a yes.
Okay, the motion passes 5-2 with Councilwoman Caputi and Vice Mayor Durham opposing. So next we will continue our presentation.
Yeah, if we could have the next slide, action 2. Oops. Mandatory. It'll be slide number 18. Thank you. Yes, the action item number 2 is to, as the council directed us to, back at the workshop, we brought the International Green Construction Code for consideration as a mandatory code. I wanted to point out that the adoption of this code would have an effective date of the latter of July 1st, 2023, or the date that the city zoning ordinance is amended in response to ordinance number 4576.
Councilwoman Janik?
I would like to, at this point, make a motion, if it's appropriate, to adopt ordinance number 4576 and resolution 12505, adopting the 2021 International Green Construction Code, IGCC, including all amendments in Attachment 7, as a mandatory code for all new commercial building projects with an effective date of the later of July 1, 2023, or the date the city zoning ordinance is amended in response to ordinance number 4576.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. I will repeat a couple things, and noting that the date of effective, when it becomes in effect. So whenever a code's adopted, it requires training of staff. It requires competency. In this case, it requires an additional step and an awareness, both to the building community, so that everyone's aware of what is in Scottsdale common practice, and where we can improve on water conservation, on energy conservation, and there will be a rollout that will be required with all ordinances. I try to clarify that as well on the previous discussion with that code. There's always a rollout that the administrator does, and we don't require him to come back and re-explain how his process is, because that has to be rolled out, and that's your competency to get that done. The education component is vital. The message that we're sending to the public, both consumers as well as potential buyers and the multifamily industry, single-family industry, is that we can be an effective city, and there's lots of pluses to coming to Scottsdale, including our codes. So it would take other decisions for the other 80% of the homes. In most cases, those that have single panes, and even where seniors are not able to afford a double pane or other insulation, we have a fund, and we have, I believe the last report was spent about $600,000 to help seniors, again, avoid that brutal tax of your utility bill. So that's the part that the city does to outreach and help seniors with limited means. I see Councilwoman Caputi, Councilwoman Janik.
I know it's late, but I have a couple more things I'd like to speak about on this because I do think it's really important. So I support the International Green, the IGCC, of course, this is what I do for a living, but I oppose making it mandatory. We are already doing most of this. The market is solving the issue on its own. We do not need a government mandate. Again, I do this for a living. LED light fixtures are no longer, it's just a thing, right? You don't need to mandate it. People are just doing it because that's what the market has asked for, and we don't even see a request for any other kind of technology anymore. So again, the market is working. When the technology changes, people are going to be spending money on features that they don't need or want. Again, LED light fixtures are a great example. We started out with fluorescent, and then those went away in 2 seconds, right? The market corrected. So what we've not mentioned here tonight is that we are going to need more staff to enforce this mandatory code, which is already mostly being done. City expenses for additional employees to administer these codes are going to be significant, although we're brushing over it here. And permitting times are also going to increase by months. We actually can't add to the cost of housing construction and create onerous regulatory burdens without inviting problems from our state government. And I'm here to tell you that builders are already struggling with rising costs and issues with supply chains, so the codes certainly shouldn't be making that worse. I agree with our Building Advisory Board, again, the experts in this area. I think it can be mandatory for zoning bonuses, but voluntary for other buildings. This is how most of the jurisdictions in the country are handling it today. We're already adopting the updated International Energy Code. We already require LEED certification, right, on government buildings. So mandatory IGCC, I believe, is going to have unintended consequences on development in our city. For example, you're mandating that every new commercial building over 5,000 square feet is going to have to implement solar technology. Again, that payback's got to be decades before that will make sense for a building that small. To repeat myself, we shouldn't be increasing red tape and bureaucracy and costs just so we can say we're leading on this. This is going to impact our local development significantly. Developers are going to pass these increased costs through to the end users. We're going to be making housing even less affordable when we're already struggling with soaring housing costs. I think our report from a few weeks ago told us 37% of residents are now housing cost burdened. This is only going to increase that problem. Commercial lease rates are going to increase. This will affect Scottsdale businesses and Scottsdale employees. People are continually writing to us on our emails saying they don't want Scottsdale to become California. That is what this mandate is doing. The savings in utility bills won't come close to making up for the increased costs of mandating this IGCC, which we are all going to pay for. I believe we should adopt the codes as intended by the code development organizations, as Councilwoman White had suggested. Of course, they've done a lot of research on this, And for the most part, the IGCC was developed as an overlay guide, which I support, not as a mandatory code. Almost no one else has made it mandatory, and there is a reason for that. So I would like to, I'm going to try to do this correctly. The city attorney talked to me beforehand. I'd like to move to amend the alternate action 2 as presented. So it would be ordinance number 4576 and resolution number 12505 with amendments to make the 2021 International Green Code and city amendments to the IGCC mandatory for zoning and planning bonuses and voluntary for all other commercial projects with a January 7th, 2023 effective date. Thank you.
Thank you. I hear no seconds, so that dies, and thank you. Councilwoman Whitehead, Councilwoman Janik.
Okay, I'll keep it snappy, but you know, today's codes adoptions are really exceptional, even by our own standards, and it's true. Leaders lead from the front. So once again, Scottsdale's in a leadership position, but we're far from first. We know that there are states throughout the country that have adopted these codes statewide, as well as cities such as Las Vegas and Salt Lake City and Austin, as was brought up. And while I respect Councilwoman Caputi and her industry of selling lighting equipment to the building industry, we've heard from the building industry quite clearly that these costs are negligible and that routinely cities are approving projects for workforce and low-income housing that meet the IGCC standards. And I also want to point out, when we talk about costs, whose costs are we talking about? There might be some minor upfront costs to the developer, and maybe those costs are passed on. However, what I'm looking at is the lifetime costs of these buildings for the residents and the health impacts, not only to the residents that live there, but to the whole community. So we know that when we pass these building codes, we're going to deliver higher performing buildings with healthier indoor air, stringent water conservation, energy efficiency that delivers lower utility bills for as many years that these buildings are housing people, cleaner air, healthier people, reduced urban heat, and a more resilient community. This is a minor cost for spending a few extra dollars on insulation and other items in these requirements. And I want to also point out that it was mentioned many times, the cost to make a building better is quite minor. The cost to retrofit a building is either much more expensive or prohibitive. And thank goodness California decided to protect its residents from earthquakes. And I won't cite many other codes in our country. Well, in Scottsdale, the fire sprinklers. So I enthusiastically support adopting these as mandatory and once again leading the way and giving future residents and current residents the reason to move here because they know we care about them.
Councilwoman Janik.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't want visitors to come to Scottsdale in the Valley of the Sun in 2040 and say, this used to be wonderful and it's now a ghost town. I want us to thrive into the future. I want us to be here in 2040, 2050, 2060. And if we don't take these steps now, we won't be here. And there have been many experts that have written on this. We are in an urban heat island. We are short of water. We let the residents decide how much water they wanted to use. I moved here 18 years ago from Colorado, the headwaters of the mighty Colorado River. I was on restrictions then. I moved to the desert, and there's no restrictions for water. Everybody's got the greenest lawn around. That shows you how sometimes giving people the choice doesn't work. Maybe it works with light bulbs, but it certainly hasn't worked with water. We could be in much better shape. This action will put us on the right track so we can survive, so we have the tools to do it right. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I see no other hands up. I would, just add that the motion which failed for a second is the standard multifamily playbook, and it is not going to fly here in this chamber. I believe that what we're doing as a responsible body with a policy in a positive way, has a greater benefit. Saying that it only applies to zoning cases when our properties are already zoned for buildings and such. So they wouldn't even go through as a rezoning or upzoning process and fail to meet the standards that we're expecting. It's not acceptable to do less, and for that, I'd ask everyone to record your vote.
Councilwoman Whitehead is a yes.
Okay, so, excuse me. It's 6-1. The motion passes. Congratulations, with Councilwoman Caputi objecting. Next, I will move on to, yes. Go. Continue, Mr. Clack. Are you going to
I'm done.
say sayonara?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry I don't have a Scottsdale ornament for you. If I did, but please enjoy. We have an amazing promenade with great things for kids. So at this point, we will move on to the opportunity for a public comment. Public comment involves an opportunity for anyone to step forward on an item that may not be on the agenda, but would be within our jurisdiction. I see that there's no request for public comment. Therefore, I will close public comment. Next, I will announce whether or not there is a citizen petition on the floor. There was none received, and therefore the item number 19 is closed regarding citizens petition, and that matter is done. Finally, we have we're coming to one more meeting, which is a Wednesday meeting, which is tomorrow. And so I will invite everyone back and those interested parties. At this point, I request a motion to adjourn. And a second?
Second.
Please record your vote.
Councilwoman Whitehead is a yes.
Mayor, I apologize. We still have work study.
Oh, excuse me. At this point, actually, I do want to announce that the work study item was taken off. Well, we could convene for the work study, I guess. I will clarify that. So I will reconvene for the work study, and noting that everyone is present. However, I do wish to clarify that the work study item, which was the quarterly fiscal year, to be presented by our treasurer, will be or can be moved to January when we have the full council. So I am open to a motion to move the work study item to January 10th, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye or indicate your vote. Excuse me.
Aye.
Aye.
And yes from Councilwoman Whitehead. So just to reiterate, thank you so much for your patience. At this point, I would ask for a motion to adjourn the work study that was so brief.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second from Councilwoman Littlefield, and please record your vote.
Yes.
Unanimous. Thank you so much. See you mañana.
We have panels that circulate the water for our